Dr. Klein observes, when trauma hits, the mind builds defensive walls that stack into a maze. Following this path of least resistance keeps the mind moving in endless circles, preventing healing and trapping the individual in their past. Clark, the owner of a failing furniture store, is the physical embodiment of this isolation. He is bitter, pathologically angry, and spends his energy blaming his ex-wife for a life he feels he can no longer control. The walls Clark built to keep the world from hurting him have finally finished their work. He has successfully turned his defensive perimeter into a prison. While investigating a power surge in his basement, Clark leans against a concrete wall. The surface doesn't hold. He watches his hand and arm phase through the solid structure into a dark, empty void on the other side. Clark's reaction isn't one of terror. He looks at this infinite yellow labyrinth and sees a sanctuary, a place where the demands of the real world no longer apply. On the surface, Clark is a man with no agency and a failing business. Inside this anomaly, he can finally occupy a space that requires nothing from him, effectively ruling over an abandoned empire. This infinite empty complex is the literal, physical manifestation of the psychological void Clark has lived in for years. Clark decides to use his employees, Kat and Bobby, to map this new territory. He treats them as expendable assets, forcing them into the complex to conduct research for his own benefit. This research ends in a disaster of distorted, nightmare logic. Bobby is lowered into a sublevel filled with massive piles of laundry, where he is intercepted and killed by an entity, leaving Kat alone and separated from Clark in the depths of the complex. Driven by Clark's disappearance and her own unhealed childhood trauma, Mary eventually follows him past the threshold. She steps through the same wall in the store basement to find the man she couldn't reach in her office. Forced participation in Clark's behavioral loop carries a lethal price. When he drags others into his cycle of stagnation, the resulting collateral damage is both violent and permanent. Mary tracks Clark deep into the yellow halls and finds him almost entirely assimilated. He is no longer looking for an exit. He has found a way to exist within the anomaly's strange rules. The Backrooms functions as a memory machine that recalls the surface world with decreasing accuracy. It generates broken, numb copies of people called still lifes, shapes that lose detail and become increasingly misshapen with every iteration. Clark is drawn to these things because they lack an ego. To him, they represent the ultimate goal, a life without the burden of thought, pain, or accountability. He has descended into a grotesque routine, literally eating the spongy, foamy flesh of these still lifes. It is the ultimate consumption of a life that feels nothing. Clark binds Mary to a chair and attempts to force her into a psychological role-play of his ex-wife. He is desperately trying to extract the one thing he couldn't get on the surface, validation for his victimhood. When Mary refuses to enable him, the complex responds. It manifests Pirate Clark, the monstrous embodiment of Clark's toxic commercial persona, emerging from the shadows to devour him. The entities here aren't just random threats. The entity that kills Clark is the physical result of his refusal to change, turning his own stagnant loop into the force that destroys him. Mary narrowly survives the encounter with the Pirate Clark entity, only to be intercepted at the exit. An ASYNC containment team sedates her immediately, ending her flight before she can reach the surface. She wakes up in a sterile corporate interrogation room. The surreal nightmare of the yellow halls has been replaced by the rigid institutional walls of the ASYNC Research Institute. These dimensional blueprints reveal how the complex is currently processing the memories of those who enter. It is systematically clicking the landmarks of Mary and Clark's lives into place: the furniture store, the therapy office, and Mary's childhood home. The complex is duplicating these traumas at an exponential scale. The grid is fracturing outward in all directions, turning individual memories into an infinite, modular labyrinth. The Backrooms acts as a dimensional mirror for the untrained mind. It takes the defensive walls humans build to protect themselves and replicates them into an inescapable, infinite maze.